The streak is over. After the historic 15 wins in a row for the 2023 season, Red Bull's dominance, as I predicted, came to an end with the running of the Singapore Grand Prix. Coming up in this episode, we'll have a brief history of the Singapore Grand Prix. We'll talk about the evolution of the crash helmet and break down our thoughts from this weekend action. All this and more coming up on F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We're back with F1 Brake Check. With me is my intrepid co-host, Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing? How was your weekend?
It's good. It was really good. Nice and relaxing. It's September time frame for us now, so things are starting to get a little bit cooler. Getting out and actually being able to go ride my motorbike a little bit. Just need to get more time. More time in a day. Yeah. What about you? How was your weekend?
It was good. It was fairly uneventful. Great time, even though it was very early in the morning for us, watching the Grand Prix and all the happenings this weekend. But other than that, it was really good. So I thought the whole weekend was just fantastic from a racing perspective, from a quote unquote drama perspective. I thought it was just all around great. What's your general thoughts about the weekend?
It's funny. We'll get into this when we talk more about the race, but there's a couple of points in the race that, honest to God, if Bigfoot would have walked across the track, I still would have been more shocked at some of the things that happened in that race.
Absolutely.
I don't care about Bigfoot. Why did this happen?
Yes. We didn't have Bigfoot, but we definitely had the lizard invasion again.
Yeah, right. I should have said Godzilla, right?
Yes, exactly. Godzilla had a son.
Yeah. A few of them, right? There was like 2 or 3 different ones out on the track. Yeah. All the,
yes.
What are they? The water monitors, right?
Yeah. So
yeah, that was funny.
But yeah, it was definitely, Singapore never fails to entertain.
Exactly right. Yep.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Singapore Grand Prix history. The race was first run in 1966 and ran between 66 and 73 as a street race at Thompson Road, but it was not officially part of the F1 calendar. So it became an official part of the championship in 2008 when a new street course was constructed in Marina Bay. And that first race was won by Fernando Alonso, but under very suspect conditions. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So the race in 2008 became the very first night race in F1. And because of its layout, it's considered quite a technical track, which it is indeed. It's because of the way that the corners are designed. Although most of the corners are more or less 90 degrees, the way that they're laid out and everything, it makes it to be able to properly attack those corners and get the most out of the straightaways. You have to be very technical and very precise with your throttle and brake inputs. The Singapore Grand Prix has the distinction of having at least one safety car every year that it's ever been run.
Wow. So no kidding. I never knew that.
Yes. So every year, and in fact, Sky Sports had a great statistic that we've had 10 safety cars in the previous 5 years before this year. So it was averaging 2 safety cars per race for the last 5 years. Yep. And then we also had, both a safety car and a virtual safety car in this race, which we'll get into in a little bit. They announced last year in the 2022 race that the contract had been extended and we're going to continue to go to Singapore until at least 2028. So,
perfect.
And it will continue to be a night race. It's one of the things that I think adds a lot of the drama to the race. Sky Sports did a amazing little film with Carlos Sainz showing his training for the Singapore race. And a lot of the drivers, they train very much with Singapore in mind, knowing that it's going to be probably the single most physically demanding race in the calendar because of the heat, because of the humidity, because of the weight that they lose in fluids and everything that they sweat out. And so they will do some absolutely insane things. I don't know. Did you see the film, Corey, that Sky Sports did on his workout? Okay. So it was amazing. Sainz trainer actually set up an exercise bike in a sauna and had him in there riding the bike in the sauna. Wow. And they would do that several times in the 2 weeks leading up to the Grand Prix just to help him.
Crazy.
his conditioning. And then not only that, but the drivers actually, after the formation lap, almost every single one of the drivers will actually go back to the paddock behind the garages and will actually take an ice bath, and literally will get out of the ice bath, put on their fire suits, and then head out to the grid, in addition to wearing the cool suits.
Wow.
But they'll take these ice baths to lower their core temperature and then immediately put on the cool vests and stuff underneath their fire suits in order to try to keep their body temperature as low as possible before the race actually starts. And so it's crazy, absolutely nuts. It's just nuts the way that they train. So it was like at one point during the film, Carlos was actually out there jogging around the track. Instead of just doing a track walk, he was actually out there running the track, just trying to get himself conditioned and ready for the heat and everything. And it's definitely the training that they do definitely pays off, because at the end, did you see Norris's comments at the end of the race?
Yeah.
Yeah, about, when they asked him, how you feeling? He says, I'm ready to do it again. Let's go. I don't know how much of that was youthful exuberance and how much of it was just the fact that these guys train so hard, and they train, if not all year, they train at least the few weeks leading up to that race. They train with that race specifically in mind in their training focus.
Out of all the other tracks, 22 other tracks, they designed this one specifically. The training around that track. That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible. Okay, so a couple memorable moments from the previous year. So 2008, we were talking about the very first year that the night race was run. Fernando Alonso wins the race, but kind of the win is kind of tainted because in the closing stages, the Renault team sent a code word to Nelson Piquet Jr., who at the time was Alonso's teammate at Renault, and he intentionally crashed the car during the race in order to bring out a safety car and preserve Alonso's position in the race so that he could go on to win it. Piquet lost his ride. Now, Alonso's title was not taken away because of other circumstances and everything. Flavio Briatore actually got a lifetime ban from Formula One over that incident when everything came to light about a year later, because Piquet, because of his position in the team and everything, started grumbling. His dad started making noise and everything, and it ended up going to hearings. And in the end, like I said, Flavio Briatore, because of that incident and a number of other incidents in the past, got him a lifetime ban. As far as I know, he's still not allowed to be associated with any of the teams now, because Briatore had a unique position in Formula One at that time. Briatore was actually the team principal for Benetton, which later became Renault. But at the same time, he purchased the Ligier, the French Grand Prix team, and he was actually the owner of that team while he was the team principal at Benetton.
Wow.
Later selling the team to Alain Prost. He was also the manager for a number of drivers. To the best of my recollection, I believe he is still the manager of one or two drivers, but for the longest time, he was not. He was allowed to be their manager, but he was not allowed to come to any of the races. When Liberty Media took over, some of those bans were not lifted, but relaxed. So he has been able to be on the grid of various Grand Prix, but as far as I know, he's not allowed to work for any of the current F1 teams. He's not allowed to be team principal, manager. He's not allowed to do anything now.
Totally understandable, because
I agree.
Something as strict as that in place, teams can do that all day long. I'm really happy that it was that tough. You see things happen today, and it's this little slap here or there. They get a 5-second penalty or something minuscule that nobody really cares about. But that would definitely stop people from even thinking about that in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so 2010, Timo Glock's Lotus catches on fire during the race. Glock leaps from the car, runs over to one of the track marshals, grabs a fire extinguisher from him, and puts out the fire of his own car.
Wow.
2015, Max Verstappen, who's a little-known rookie at the time, is told to move over for his Toro Rosso teammate Carlos Sainz, for which he promptly told the team no. And he refused to pull over and give way to Sainz.
That's funny.
Yeah, there begins the legend of Max Verstappen in not giving any quarter to anyone for any
Right.
reason. So,
Right.
as much as I hate to say it, we've talked about it before on the podcast and everything, that in order to be a world champion, you have to have certain traits. You can't just have the best car. A less than world champion caliber driver in the best car is not going to win a championship.
Yeah,
So you
exactly.
have to have that mental toughness. But you also have to have that selfishness to
Yeah.
say, no, I am going to do whatever I have to do to win the championship. I'm going to take the opportunities that I'm given, whether it is in the best car or whether, with Max's first championship, he didn't have the best car. Mercedes still had the best car on the grid, but he took less than perfect equipment and wrangled everything that he could out of it. And so, but going back to, that's the whole point that I'm trying to make, is that even as a rookie, he had that presence of mind to say, no, I'm not moving over for him. If he wants to take the position, he's going to take it himself. I'm
Yeah.
not going to give it to him. So, also during the race, a spectator entered the track just as Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo were going by. They were leading the race, and he climbed onto and was standing on the track when they went by. Finds a hole in the chain link fence, climbs through it, climbs over the fence at Anderson Bridge, and is, like I said, was standing out on the track. And then after Vettel and Ricciardo went by, he then took and scaled the fence on the opposite side and came back down. And I remember this happening. I remember how crazy that was. And so the safety car gets deployed, and eventually he's arrested by the Singapore police. And it turns out that he was a young man who had a history of these kind of episodes and stuff like that.
Wow.
So I couldn't find out any more information about the young man, but hopefully he got the help that he needed, and he's doing. But and then 2017, this one, I'm sure you remember this incident. This was the year that Vettel's first year at Ferrari. I believe it was his first or second year at Ferrari. And at the start, Kimi Raikkonen comes storming up the side, and Vettel ends up crashing into his own teammate and takes out Max Verstappen all in the first corner. So this incident really was kind of the beginning, because at that point he was leading the drivers' championship. And it was at this point, because of that race and a couple other mistakes, both by him and the team later on as the season progressed, it really kind of saw his title bid unravel to the eventual race winner at Singapore and eventual world title winner, Lewis Hamilton. Because of this incident, it still, to me, is probably, it ranks up there as probably one of the craziest incidents, just because when you go back and watch it, it makes your jaw drop, just the way that the two Ferraris took and just came together, and Max Verstappen got sandwiched right in between them, and it was chaos. That you see the three cars, sliding into the wall, into the first corner and everything. And it's just one of those just insane moments in that F1 is famous for. So so there you go. There's your history of the Singapore Grand Prix. We're going to take and move on to our tech corner here, and we're going to take and talk about the evolution of the crash helmet. Corey, when I say crash helmet, what's the first thing that you think of?
The first thing I think of is, honestly, is the visor. And the second thing, very close after that, how they have it decorated, right? If it's a tribute to somebody or something to that effect, yeah.
At the dawn of the World Drivers' Championship and infancy of F1, drivers' crash helmets often were an afterthought. Many drivers in the early dangerous times usually wore cloth or leather caps, often adapted from airplane caps, and simple goggles to keep the dust and dirt out of their eyes. And as you would expect, they provided little in the way of actual protection for the drivers. First dedicated helmets often resembled either like polo helmets or the helmets worn by soldiers during World War II. So they often sat on the top of the head, had no ear protection whatsoever, and they were usually made out of layers of like cotton cloth that was soaked in a resin to give them like rigidity. So, and then just would have simple padding inside. In the very first couple of years of the World Drivers' Championship, Formula One didn't even mandate helmets. And there was actually some famous pictures of some drivers driving along with, they would either have nothing on at all, or they would just have goggles on. And then I believe it was either 52 or 54, I can't remember which, is when first year that helmets were mandated by the sporting regulations. Then in 1954, Bell Helmet introduced the first helmet made specifically for motorsports. The helmet was made from a fiberglass shell that extended down the sides of the driver's head and protected his ears, but still had an open face that required the continued use of goggles to protect the driver's eyes. It was around this time that drivers began also using balaclavas to cover the lower part of their face and to protect them from choking on dust and dirt. It offered very little in the way of protection, unlike the balaclavas that you see today, which are actually made out of Nomex and are actually part of the fire protection for the drivers that they wear underneath the helmets. And then 1968, one of the most brilliant drivers, engineers, and motorsport innovators that the sport has ever seen, Dan Gurney, the man who invented the Gurney flap, he worked with Bell Helmets to create the first full-face helmet. The helmet was also the first to feature Nomex, which, as we just touched on, is a fire-retardant cloth that assists in protecting the face and the head in the event of a fire. Now, the reason why Dan Gurney actually worked with Bell to develop the full face helmet was because Gurney was a very tall guy. He was like 6'2", 6'3", so he was a pretty tall guy. And so he sat up much higher up out of the car than a lot of his contemporaries. And so he would get a lot more hit by rocks and debris and everything on the lower part of his face. So he helped develop the full face helmet in order to protect the lower part of his face. Yeah. So the full face helmet became the standard in the 1970s as safety became more of a concern. It was also during this time that drivers started to create the paint jobs like we're used to seeing now, as a way to make them more recognizable out on track, and also to take and show off more of their personality. So most of the early paint schemes were pretty simple. It would usually either consist of just the driver's name, or maybe a few stripes. There was the iconic one, silver and red, that Mario Andretti did with the red stripe down the middle of the helmet and everything. And then you also had, but you did have some drivers that had quite a bit of creativity. So you had like Graham Hill, who had his dark navy one with the London Rowing Club logo on it. And then of course Jackie Stewart's beautiful white with his family's tartan around the top of it and everything. So and that's kind of where that started off at. And then as the helmets started getting larger and everything, giving a more surface area and everything, you had the birth of some really iconic design, like Nigel Mansell's Union Jack design, Gilles Villeneuve's red and black heartbeat. It was a black arrow, but it looked kind of like the heartbeat signal, like on an EKG monitor and everything. And then the current helmets that now often involve, like you were saying just a little bit ago, involve some really complex designs and everything. So you think Max Verstappen's lion logo that's on the top of his helmet. In the early days, the drivers would have, maybe their names on them or something, or maybe they might have primary sponsor on their helmet. And now they have, all kinds of sponsor logos and everything emblazoned across as part of
money.
It. Yeah, exactly. Pre-2015, Sebastian Vettel was and still is the king of special design. Before, at almost every race weekend, Sebastian Vettel would always have some kind of unique design for his helmet for that particular weekend. So much so that the Stick in the Muds, running Formula One at the time, actually dictated that starting in 2015, the drivers could only have one helmet design for the entire season, and they were allowed one special helmet during the entire course of the season. So back then it was like 17, 18 races. They would have to, all but one race, they would have to run with the same design, and then they were allowed one special design. And then finally in 2020, FIA and Formula One did away with that rule and allowed the drivers to be more creative, which has produced some absolutely phenomenal designs since then. Over the evolution of the helmet, they went from just a simple wrap around, basically an enlarged head shape, to the designs that we see now, which will have, depending upon the track, the car design, the driver's preferences and stuff, they will have special fairings and special air inlets and things like that on the design to assist with. Some of the teams will actually design special fairings for the driver's helmets. They can attach to them and everything to take help with the aerodynamics of the car. Sometimes, to take and help channel air off the top of the driver's head into the airbox that drives the air for the engine. Certain circuits, they'll have fairings along the sides and stuff to reduce on the buffeting. And if you look at the evolution of the helmets, you can see how even just in the last 10 or 15 years, how much the shapes of the helmets have changed in order to, like everything else in Formula One, to make them more aerodynamic and to make them assist with general performance.
Well, that and driver safety.
Yes, absolutely. And the great segue. Whereas the original helmets were made first, like we talked about, with cloth soaked in resin to make them rigid, and later fiberglass. The current Formula One helmets are created with space age composites made out of carbon fiber, Kevlar, Xylon, and Nomex. Wow. So these composites make the helmets incredibly light, but they're also quite literally bulletproof.
They'd have to be at those speeds.
Yeah,
they have to. Yeah,
they absolutely do. Okay, so the modern design of the helmet saved the life of Felipe Massa when, during practice at the Hungary Grand Prix, a spring from Ruben Barrichello's Brawn actually came off the car and struck Massa in the head right above his eyebrow. And if it hadn't been for all the safety and all the technology and development that went into the helmet, of course, it would have killed him. He still had to have a titanium plate placed in his head where it smashed him above his eyebrow. But he still ended up making a full recovery and returned to racing in Formula One. So the current helmets can withstand temperatures up to 790 degrees Fahrenheit because of the Nomex and because of all the composites and everything. And it can also withstand a 225 gram projectile traveling at 250 kilometers per hour. Or roughly 140 miles per hour. Yeah. All of this while the helmet only weighs about 1.5 kilograms. Wow. Or basically 2.2 pounds. So there you go. There's your tech corner on the evolution of the modern F1 helmet, which become an integral part of F1 safety.
Just real quick, back on the crash helmet. Part of that is the visor. Not only are they there, for support and everything like that, for clarity and really being able to see, but also they have film on it. And you can see this several drivers. There's a couple drivers actually during Singapore. You can see them taking a piece
the tear-offs.
Yeah, the tear-offs, exactly. So when it gets dirty, they don't have to wipe it. They just take one of the tear-offs off. It's as good as new. So it's just another really cool innovation that F1 has in helmets that I don't know if anybody else is using that, but that's a really cool technology that you don't have to worry about cleaning anything off. Just take one of the pull-offs off and you're good to go.
Yep. The tear-offs have been in use for probably about 3 decades now. Yeah. IndyCar also used to use them before they implemented the aero screens on the chassis.
Okay.
So, but now actually in IndyCar, they actually have tear-offs on the aero screen. So a driver can come into the pits, and while he's in the pits getting service, one of the guys can actually, once he's done with his tire chain, he can literally stand up, grab a hold of it, and rip one completely off the aero screen. So.
That's cool.
But also the one thing though that about the tear-offs though too, if you've ever noticed that when a driver takes his tear-off off, he will actually stick his arm completely up out of the car, straight up, and before letting it go, because there has been times where they've actually peeled them off and let them go, and it's either gone into the air box by a mistake, or it's gone into one of the side pods and clogged up one of the radiators, especially with the halos and everything. Because once upon a time, before the halos, they could put their arm out to the side and let it go, and it would slide along the side of the engine cover. But with the halos, the teams have all designed the aerodynamics around the halo and everything that they can't do it out the side anymore. They now have to stick their hand straight up above through outside of the halo to let it go, so that to make sure that it doesn't get sucked up into a critical component. But the thing is, though, is that I haven't heard of a specific moment that it's happened, but I've always wondered, has there ever been an incident where one of the drivers took their tear-off and threw it behind them and everything intentionally to take and try to get one of their, to take out,
hopefully take somebody out.
Yes, exactly. Not necessarily take them out, but, hamper their performance or something. Right. They let it go and it gets sucked up into the car behind them, into their air intake or to the radiators or something like that. So.
Exactly.
So let's get on to the race.
Oh, yes.
So,
Lovely
okay,
race.
the red bulldozer finally gets stopped in its tracks. Everybody was always up to this point has been saying, well, Red Bull's just going to win every race. And I've been saying since the beginning of the year that it was not going to happen. That statistically it was going to be impossible because there was either going to be a track that didn't suit the car, or there was going to be some kind of incident that took them out. There was going to be something that stopped the win streak. Here we had it. Even as Christian Horner said during the pre-race, when he was on the grid, Martin Brundle asked him, he said, what's going on with the car? And he says, other than the wing angles, we didn't change anything on the car, but the track just didn't suit the car. We're having all kinds of problems with the brake bias and things like that was causing the cars to bottom out.
So, they were lost the entire weekend. There was not one part of this weekend that was redeemable. This is the first time since 2008 that they didn't make Q3.
Yeah.
It was amazing just how bad they looked. It just, there's no other word for it. They looked amateurish.
Yeah, they finally looked fallible.
You have a rookie in Lawson that beat a 2-time world champ. Actually, let's be honest, he's probably going to be a 3-time world champ by the end of 2023.
Oh, yeah, so, absolutely.
I mean, that's how bad off he. And not only that, but that was the junior team that took him out too.
Exactly. So, which in all fairness, has happened occasionally.
Right. But again,
this is their favor. But still, you're right.
Third race in F1, third, and that's just. It's not a testament of how good or bad Liam Lawson is. It's a testament of how lost Red Bull was. Just they had no answer for it at all.
Yep. They did. They had no answer this weekend. And now the one thing is, though, is that despite how bad the car was, Red Bull still showed their professionalism in the fact that they were able to salvage the maximum amount of points that the car was going to allow them to do. They had the presence of mind that we're this far back in the field. We know Singapore, because it's always been such a safety car heavy race. We know that a safety car is going to be inevitable.
Yeah.
We just know that. Let's roll the dice. Let's start on the hard tires. Let's see how long we can go. Maybe we can get lucky with a safety car and everything.
And they did.
Which is exactly what happened during the first safety car. Max is running in second. I think Checo was running either fourth or fifth. Now, unfortunately, they still had to make their stop later on, which dropped them back down in the order, but it still got them back up. Max still comes home fifth. Checo comes home in eighth. So they take from the team purposes, they got the maximum amount of points that the weekend was going to allow. So they took advantage of the strategy and they took advantage of everything that was available to them. And they made lemonade out of lemons.
Exactly. And, really looking throughout the rest of the weekend, practice and qualies, 5th and 8th is really good compared to what I thought that they were going to do. Horrible for Red Bull this weekend.
With as bad as the car looked, I really thought if they can maintain place through attrition or something, they might gain 1 or 2 places. So for Max to gain 6 positions on a really forgettable weekend, I think is just a testament to just how good the Red Bull team is, even when the car isn't there. So, and they were smart enough to say, hey, we've seen Max come from that far back before to win a race. But even he was like, after qualifying, would say, there's no way we're going to win this. The team knew that there was no way, because even though Singapore is such a great track and it's such a technical track, it's very hard to pass on, very difficult to do overtakes. Max was able to temper expectations by saying, hey, there's no way a win is in the cards, but we're going to do everything we can to absolutely maximize the opportunities that are given to us. And they did.
We didn't think that 5th was even achievable. Knowing everybody else who was up ahead of them, 5th and 8th, they should be
I thought maybe 8th and 10th, 8th and 11th. That I thought that was probably about what we were looking at.
Moving on to Ferrari, we both have said how much we love Alonso and how much strategy that man has in his head when he's racing. Now, Sainz. Sainz is a very close second now. I'm looking at him and just seeing he's pulling Norris. His race engineer's like, hey, Norris is less than a second. He has DRS. And Sainz is like, yeah, I know. This is part of the strategy. I don't want to get passed by 2 Mercedes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I'm going to give Lando everything I can. I want those Mercedes behind him. And that's exactly what, the forethought to have that, because his engineer is looking at everything. He's looking at strategies. Even he didn't have that. forethought. But Sainz was like, okay, this is what I have to do. That's why Sainz was asking, hey, how far back is Norris? How far back is Norris? Every lap, let me know how far back he is. That's why he wanted to pull Norris to make sure Norris had enough frontline speed to head off those Mercedes. Just a stroke of brilliance right there.
It was just absolutely brilliant. At one point, I want to say it was like with 5-6 laps or so left to go, he actually had pulled far enough ahead that Norris, for that one lap, actually fell out of DRS. He looked very vulnerable to the Mercedes not having DRS anymore. And Sainz was smart enough to think, like you said, his strategic mind was so good that he actually eased off a little bit so that Norris could get back within that second so that he could keep DRS so that he had a fighting chance against the Mercedes.
Such a great strategy. At the beginning of the race, it was a little drawn out just from the aspect of everybody was trying to save tires so closer to the end of the race. The last quarter of that race was well worth it. It was such a great race.
It was so wicked. It was so wicked awesome. Ferrari, they came out of the containers fast all weekend long. They took advantage of Red Bull's struggles and they pounced and they did everything. Sainz was just, I mean, he never set a foot wrong all weekend long. It was the perfect weekend for him. And Leclerc was right there with him and everything. So Ferrari took advantage.
Tires dropped off. Yeah, exactly.
Ferrari was just absolutely spot on this weekend. So, and it was great to see Ferrari finally get their first win under Vasseur, finally gets that monkey off of his back and everything. And the elation on his face on the podium when they handed him the constructor's trophy and everything. And it's just, he was just so beaming happy that it was because I like Vasseur. I really do. I still think Binotto, he got a little bit of a raw deal. I think part of it was on him, part of it was on Ferrari. But to see joy in Vasseur's face and to see him get that first win helped a lot. So,
and the way he did it too, it wasn't an easy win, meaning that he wasn't like 3 minutes ahead of everybody else. It was a tough battle the entire way. He had Mercedes, he had McLaren, he had everybody pushing Ferrari because everybody knows that Ferrari's weakness is their tires. So you push them hard enough, you're going to get them to wear out their tires fast enough. In fact, that was Russell's main concern. That's what he wanted to get past Norris so he could get Sainz to really use those tires up so he could eventually take first.
Yeah, so he could take advantage of it. Yes.
Exactly. On to Mercedes. Oh,
wow. Wow. They didn't look super impressive during practice, but then come qualifying, Russell qualifies at second. I mean, comes in with just a hair's breadth of taking pole. Russell had a great qualifying. Lewis qualifies fifth, which is nothing to sneeze at. Come qualifying, they looked really, really strong. So, and then
it just one of the best moments, I think, maybe extending it to the entire year, was seeing those two Mercedes hunt down Norris and Sainz. It was such a great moment. Man, to see this two just go after it. And then, like I said in the beginning, Bigfoot could have crossed the road, yelled up and down. We could have had aliens come down saying, we're taking over Earth. And I still would have said, what the hell just happened to
Singapore is traditionally very, very hard on the tires. Mercedes played the strategy beautifully. They knew when the virtual safety car came out, when Ocon lost power, he stops out on the track.
That's another heartbreak right there. We'll talk about later.
Yeah. And we'll get to that in a few minutes, but Ocon loses the drive. This virtual safety car comes out. Mercedes sees their position on track and says, hey, we'll lose a couple places, but we're going to put on this fresh set of medium tires that we've been saving all weekend long. And we're going to double stack the cars, which double stacking, as we know, when it works, it's brilliant, but it can go so wrong so easily. Mercedes played the strategy beautifully to say, okay, if we bring them in, we're going to lose 2 or 3 places on track, but we're going to have this fresh set of medium tires while everybody else is running the hards that are quickly going off. We're going to take a flyer at it. And had they not done that, they could have maintained position, because everybody else was having the same problems with the hard tires going off. They would have probably wound up 5th and 6th respectively. They were smart enough. They said, box. Russell comes in, gets his tires immediately. I mean, he's off.
Yeah.
Hamilton pulls in. They pull off another brilliant pit stop, just back to back. And send them out. They're able to pick off Leclerc. They pick off Max.
Yeah.
They pick off Leclerc. They even picked off Gasly. So they took in succession, they picked off Gasly, Verstappen, and Leclerc to go from 7th and 8th to 3rd and 4th. At one point, George radios the pit, radios his engineer and says, how far ahead? And they gave him the interval and he says, there's no way. And his engineer said, no, we got it. Go for it. Go.
Yeah.
It's hammer time. As they used to say to Lewis, put the hammer down. You can do it. If you push hard enough, you can do it. And he did. I mean, and he, to his credit, and Lewis at one point was actually even hunting Russell down in the fact that Lewis was actually turning faster laps than George was.
Yeah.
But that was the problem, though, is Russell was pushing so hard that on the last lap, as he's trying to pass Norris going into turn 10, he was trying hard and he ends up losing the back end and puts it into the wall. Yeah. And it was just absolutely it was
just a heartbreak.
It was mind-blowing,
yeah,
exciting, and heartbreaking, all within the span of about 0.3 of a second.
I was watching that, and again, I was just in such disbelief.
An excellent, podium for Lewis. He was there to pick up the scraps and bring it home in 3rd place. Lewis ends up with fastest lap of the day, gets that 1 extra point for it. All in all, Mercedes had a really great race. Mercedes does one of the things that they do best, and that's, play the strategy perfectly.
Yeah, that's exactly it, man.
McLaren had another great weekend. They brought what was essentially, not counting the car at Silverstone, which was basically a completely revamped car. This was the largest upgrade that they had made to the car so far this year. 9 different upgrades that they made to the car this weekend. It showed fast right out of the box when they got there. Poor Piastri gets caught out during Q1. He gets caught out by the red flag and winds up qualifying 17th through no fault of his own. I mean, he was ready to take his flyer. The red flag comes out and he basically gets screwed.
Yeah.
So, exactly. You have to feel for Piastri. But with that being said, he goes from 17th, gains 10 places and brings it home in 7th place. Amazing. For having started that low down. That is amazing.
Yeah, it's a testament to him. It's a testament to the McLaren's car now too, and their strategy.
Yes. Strategically, they ran a perfect race for both Piastri and Norris, but especially for Piastri to be able to take, and like I said, he gains 10 places from a horrible qualifying, mostly down to bad luck, and he was just fast all weekend. So it was, it's just great to see. And then Lando Norris brings it home in a brilliant 2nd place. Norris said there was no way that unless the Ferrari broke down or Sainz made a mistake, there was no way I was getting past him. He was still close enough that there at the end, I mean, he's within a second, mostly because Sainz backed off. But even if Sainz hadn't backed off on his pace to help keep the gap between him and Norris within that 1 second so that Norris kept DRS, as well as the McLaren was running, I do think that probably at the very least, George would have picked him off. He had the 1 lap without DRS and George really closed up the gap. But then when he got DRS back, he was able to hold Russell at bay. I do believe that Russell probably would have picked him off probably on that last lap had he not kept DRS. Norris had a fantastic weekend, very well-deserved 2nd place on the podium. I'm so excited because he is getting just so agonizingly close to that first win. Right. And I can't wait for him to get that first win.
That's going to be so great.
Hoping it comes this year.
Couldn't agree more.
This weekend was it was tragic and a comedy of errors all in one. Stroll, who has that horrific shunt during qualifying. Thankfully, I mean, he gets out and he walks away unassisted and everything from the car. I'm kind of wondering what was going on behind the scenes that we weren't being told, because when they said that he withdrew from the race because, he just general soreness and everything, I'm wondering if maybe there wasn't something a little more, because, I mean, this is the same kid that we were all talking up at the beginning of the season when he takes in like 2 weeks before the first race of the season, has that horrible bike accident, has to have surgery on his hand, and he is able to come out first race of the season, qualifies incredibly well, has a phenomenal run, and we're all talking about how tough the kid is and everything. Yeah. That I'm kind of wondering what was actually going on behind the scenes that we weren't being told about after post race? Was he experiencing maybe some concussion like symptoms? Maybe he didn't have a full on concussion, but was he maybe experiencing some vertigo or something else as a result? Because I mean, that crash was scary looking at the speed that he was going. Testament to how strong the modern F1 cars, relatively little is damage, and for him to be able to take and actually get out of the car and walk away unassisted, testament to the cars. But it makes me wonder if maybe there wasn't something more going on. Your thoughts?
I totally agree. Just a heartbreak for him. Like you said, I've seen worse, and I've seen drivers come back the next day. So it's so weird because you just never know how it affects certain people. Was he looking like Daniel Ricciardo?
That one looked very innocuous and
exactly same thing. I mean, this one looked bad, no doubt about it. But the wreck itself, I've seen worse, and I've seen people drive the next day even. I'm hoping that that's all it is. He just needed some additional rest, and he'll be back.
Yep, he'll be back stronger than ever, but for this weekend in Japan.
Right. So, yeah, exactly.
But Alonso, oh my God,
dude.
This is a weekend that Alonso is going to want to forget fast.
Now, this is the first time that since he's been with Aston that I've heard him actually start complaining about the car. All the other times he's talking about how beautiful the car is, good strategies, but this time he's like, there's something wrong with this car.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like Red Bull. Red Bull, the brakes weren't working right, the setup wasn't good, all that other stuff. And then we're having the same complaints that we're hearing now from, or what we heard from Alonso, saying that he couldn't get the car hooked up.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. For him to bring it in seventh place in qualifying is a testament to his skill and ability. But you're right. At the same time, the Aston Martin was not suited as well for this track. For Singapore, maybe they got caught looking ahead a little bit to Japan next weekend, which is a track that I think will suit the Aston Martin much better. Like you said, much like Red Bull, I think that the Aston Martin was having some brake issues with the brake balance and everything, because we see him as he's entering the pits, he slides a little wide, goes over the line, for which he gets a 5-second penalty. I'm still angry for Alonso, because it was like, yes, okay, so he locked it up coming across. He wasn't actually in the pit area yet. He was still in the pit entrance lane, and he locks him up, slides a little wide, and for which he gets a 5-second penalty.
Max almost made the same mistake.
Yes, exactly.
The tires. Then the tires just weren't able to hold it. It's not like he wasn't paying attention. The tires simply couldn't hold it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that was they did comment about that this weekend, though. Speaking
That's
about
true.
That they did talk about that this weekend, that they said that the hard tires, especially the heat cycling on them, took a long time for them to come back after they'd cooled off a little bit. After the safety car, after that ended, that was part of the reason why Max and Checo started to fall off, get picked off fairly quickly after the safety car ended, was just simply because they were having a hard time getting the heat back into the hard tires after being cooled off during the safety car period. Something else somebody said this weekend too, that because parts of the track had been repaved and other parts still had the older tarmac, that they said that I believe it was Lawson who was talking about it, said it's like the newer paved parts have lots of grip, and then you go off into the other areas that have the older surface, and it becomes super slippery out there comparatively. And I think it's just all those things together working against him. Alonso takes and winds up with a 5-second penalty. He comes in to serve it, and then they have a problem with the rear wheel. I'm still not 100% sure exactly what happened there, but so he has an absolutely disastrous pit stop that takes and drops him all the way to the back of the grid, and he ends up finishing dead last of the cars that are still running. Although he did keep his streak alive of having finished every race and every lap this season, but albeit in a position that he just was not happy about.
Yeah.
and I don't blame him. The thing is that somebody mentioned this weekend that it's like, it seems like Ferrari and Mercedes have surpassed Aston Martin in the developmental race so far, which is really shocking, that because with all of the resources and everything that Stroll Sr. has put into the team and everything, that it's really surprising that they haven't kept up the development on the car. But then again, maybe they could surprise us, and in the next couple races, they could bring out a set of upgrades that we're not aware of.
It'll be nice to see if they can get back to the front of the grid like they were in the beginning of the year.
Yep, and fingers crossed that hopefully they will. Yeah, so let's talk AlphaTauri. Once again, Liam Lawson put on a show this weekend. Like you were saying earlier, really only his second full race weekend, having jumped into the car for qualifying at Zandvoort. This is literally only his second full race weekend, and he's already in both weekends, he's out qualified his teammate Yuki. And not only that, but this weekend, he not only does he out qualify his teammate, but he actually gets into Q3 for the first time. And as you mentioned, knocks out the reigning and two-time world champion in Max Verstappen. He out qualifies both Red Bulls and his teammate. This kid is just,
he's on fire.
He is on fire. Yuki did not do himself any favors at all this weekend. I mean, he had a terrible qualifying. He gets beaten out by his much younger, much less experienced teammate. This is a track that Lawson has never even seen before, other than in the simulator. And he out qualifies his much more experienced teammate. So this is the second race in a row where Yuki doesn't even complete 2 laps in a race. At Monza, he stops on the formation lap. Yeah. And here he stops on the first lap.
Perez, though. Perez knocked him out.
But still, I never saw the damage to the car. If all it was a simple puncture, is the fact that he didn't even try to bring it back around to try to get a tire changed. If all it was a simple puncture. So unless there was some more damage to the car that I'm not aware of, that's also got to start to, to play into management's mind of what kind of mental fortitude does Yuki have? And, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I may be way off base here. So, Sonoda fans, don't come at me. I really think that he is under so much pressure right now. And I think that he's starting to crack under the pressure. First of all, he's already seen his teammate from the beginning of the year get sacked and get replaced by Ricardo, and then he outqualifies him Ricardo's first weekend back, but second weekend back Ricardo outperforms him. I think he's starting to show cracks. So let's talk about somebody who's not so bright. So this was a track that Williams was expected to really shine at. It did not work out that way. I'm beginning to start to think that the Williams is a lot like Mercedes was earlier this year, where it's very much a Jekyll and Hyde type situation, where on tracks where they don't think the car is going to be very good, it's very good. And on tracks where it should excel, it's not doing as well. So it's been a very up and down season for Williams, not for Albon. Albon has continued to impress. He is doing things with that Williams that most other drivers couldn't do. He has been super impressive. Sargent with the same equipment, like you said, he isn't impressing anybody, and which is terrible. I mean, I really like the kid. I really want to see him do well, but he's not helping himself. And it's like he has, Albon's in Q3 and he's out in Q1.
Right.
And then on top of that, 14 laps into the race, he takes and stuffs it into the wall, tears off the front wing, and ends up, bringing out the first safety car of the day. He's able to limp the car back to the pits, get a new wing and everything. But at that point, his day's pretty much done, because who knows what other kind of damage was done to the car. That,
like you said earlier in the podcast, it's a very hard track to pass. So you took 20 seconds, 40 seconds to get out of the pits, because you had to get the front wing replaced. Obviously your tires and everything like that. By that time, you were already last. And then after that, you're an additional, I think he was 20 or 30 seconds behind. I mean, your race is already done. Definitely didn't help himself at all. But what I was going to say is, it's very reminiscent of how he's driving now. The way that Mick Schumacher was driving his last year. Very stressed, very much trying to push too hard in certain places. And that's causing these crashes. And that's what happened to Mick. He was pushing too hard. He was trying to save that seat. And at the time, he just didn't have the skill set to move that forward. So I see the same thing happening in Lawson. He's just getting that nervousness,
he's getting scared. But not scared in the fearful way.
No,
but scared in the fact that he's going to lose his seat.
Yep, that's exactly it. So good news at Alfa Romeo.
Yeah. So we got the announcement this weekend that one of my other predictions from last week is not going to come true, because I thought that I made the prediction that Granu, that he might get dropped at the end of this season when his contract was up and they were going to slot Mick in there, but good for Granu. And the fact that he got a contract extension that will see him back on the grid next year.
That is awesome.
We'll talk about our predictions from the last episode and how this is going to play into it.
Yeah.
But more or less, I guess really the only other thing to talk about as far as Alfa Romeo goes is Bottas had another DNF this weekend. I hate to see it because I'm like you. I love Bottas. I think he's a phenomenal driver. I think he's a great personality. But just he's had a run of bad luck at Alfa Romeo the last few races, and I'm hoping that Japan will turn things around for him.
Yeah, definitely.
So last thing that I forgot to put on the show notes, though, is I forgot to put on there about Alpine. So we had talked a little bit back about the virtual safety car about coming out when poor Ocon lost the drive on the car. First, we thought it was an engine failure, but it ends up being a transmission issue. And he was running very well up to that point, and then the car just lets go on him.
It was so disheartening to see because he had so many great battles. He was doing so well. He had such a great drive, and then his transmission fails. Oh, Ocon. If it wasn't for bad luck, bud, you'd have none at all.
I'm telling you, very much so. The opposite of it, though, Pierre Gasly had a really good day. And ends up bringing home 6th place in the points and everything. So he's only, what was it? I mean, he was still 16, 17 seconds adrift of Max. All in all, for a car that didn't look great all weekend long, they were kind of middling at best. For him to bring it home in 6th place is a really good day for Alpine.
The Alpines look good. It's either their strategy is bad or their cars blow up.
Yes, exactly.
If they could rectify one of those, they may actually be able to save some of the points.
Yeah, knocking on wood that hopefully that they can make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk real quick. Let's preview this coming weekend. So we are in Japan for the Suzuka Grand Prix, one of the truly great racetracks that's on the Formula One calendar. It's been a fixture for a very, very long time, and it always produces some really great racing and has produced some absolute epic battles that we'll talk about next week. So looking forward to that.
Definitely. Can't wait.
Yes. All right, then. So let's go ahead. Are you ready to bring this one home?
Ready.
All right, let's do it then. So we'll see you in a week when we come to you to talk about the Japanese Grand Prix. Until then, we'll see you later.
Thank you for listening to F1 Great Chat. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. We value your feedback and passion, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, stay inside track limits and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.